Welcome to the Session X podcast. In this episode, I sit down with action sport photographer Richard Hallman. I love this conversation. We start with Richard's introduction to extreme sports and photography at a young age and how that shaped one of the most incredible careers, capturing breathtaking and inspirational images all around the globe. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. I've been obsessed with action sports my entire life. A single universal language of pure stoke. In these timeless moments, we experience the greatest joys and purest emotions. Life makes sense, completely present, in harmony with nature. In studying the evolution of extreme sports, it's easy to identify a direct link to ultimate human performance. Monk-like focus, body and mind mastery, mind-blowing applications of courage, confidence, and creativity. But where does it come from? How do we get it? And most importantly, how can more people access these superhuman qualities? My name is Matt Schollard. I'm a peak performance and mindset coach, and I'm also an extreme athlete. Together with some of the greatest action sport professionals on earth, we'll drop into the powerful lessons found within their chosen disciplines and explore how you can apply them toward your own journey of greatness. Welcome to Session X Podcast, the intersection of extreme sports and peak performance. Welcoming today to the Session X podcast, my dear friend and action sport photographer, Richard Hallman. Richard, welcome, my brother.
Thanks. Really great to be here today.
Yeah, man. So right now, Richard and I are actually, we're in Paia in Maui. So this conversation is probably going to be, maybe some distractions as we look out the window and see the palm trees blowing. Not quite 11 a.m. yet, so we can't get on the water. But dude, how long have you been on Maui for?
Been here for about 10 days. Plan on being here for about 6 weeks.
You're waiting for the next big jaw swell, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, next week looks like it's going to be potentially big, but forecasts change so quickly, and you really don't know until about 72 hours out.
Really? Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar with your work, Richard Hallman is the epitome of action sport photography, multiple award-winning magazine covers, the master of big wave surfing, big mountain photography, big snow. If it's big and it's extreme, you're at the forefront capturing the most inspiring, jaw-dropping photos I have ever seen. Ever, man.
Well, that's a huge compliment. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. I mean, my house is adorned with no less than 6 of your your photos, man. They're incredible. So, how does one? Because you grew up in Michigan, right?
I grew up in Northwest Indiana, on the southern tip of Lake Michigan, and I'm fortunate that my parents both were avid skiers. And so I started skiing when I was like 4 years old. And then growing up on the lake, we had a Hobie Cat. My mom and dad bought my brother a windsurfer in 1980.
The original?
Yeah.
Like the branded windsurfer?
Yeah, seriously, yeah. It had like teak booms and yeah, I had to makeshift harness lines, yeah. So, but my brother went to college, and that was left to me to play with for the summers. And,
What year was that? Did you first got?
That was in 1981.
So 81 was your first exposure to windsurfing.
Yeah.
And before that, how old were you in 81?
I was a sophomore in high school. Yeah. So,
when you were at that age, what was more appealing, windsurfing or skiing?
Oh my God, they were equal. Summertime I had a yard care business where I had a wind clause that if it was windy, I was going windsurfing. And, in the wintertime, we had big snow in the wintertime in the early 80s. After school, I would walk up the street with a shovel and my skis and build jumps and do all kinds of crazy stuff. Cause I was 17 when I graduated high school. So I was kind of a late bloomer anyway. So, I used to get bullied and, whatever. And I wasn't big enough to play team sports, football or whatever. So I definitely gravitated towards things like skiing and, individual sports and windsurfing.
It's so relatable. So this podcast, as you know, it's the intersection of extreme sports and peak performance. And
Sure.
peak performance has so many components and like so many avenues with which to explore. I definitely want to talk about that particular in your youth, when you were 17 and you were skiing and you were windsurfing. How did those sports positively impact your young life?
I don't know how to put it into words, because the freedom, especially with the windsurfing, it took a while to learn to windsurf and to be able to go out and back and whatever. But there were very few people that were windsurfing when, my actual next door neighbor, who was my godfather, basically taught me how to windsurf. And he would not let me come in until I could go out to this buoy and come in without falling. And that sort of, that satisfaction of accomplishing something that was like so new and so different and so whatever was really amazing. And then as I got better, I realized that, it takes some discipline, it takes some work to progress and to get out in bigger wind, to get out in bigger waves, and so I think even on those early times, I found that I needed to push myself. So
For me, it was, so I grew up overseas. I traveled, I like moved my whole life. And I always struggled with a sense of like identity and a sense of like community, right? I was always the outsider. I was the American kid living in a foreign country. And like, I didn't have this connection and relatability. And I didn't necessarily in high school and younger years when I first started windsurfing as well, like I didn't have this identity. I was always labeled like, well, you're the American kid in Australia. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's cool and all, but like, that's not who I am. Until I started windsurfing. And then at that point, nah, dude, I'm a windsurfer. And I learned to windsurf in Australia, in Narra, New South Wales in 1988. And at the time, windsurfing was so popular. Robbie Nash was my hero. I had a big poster of him on my wall, US 1111, pink sail. And I was just, oh man. And it's like, well, I'm connected to these guys on Maui. I'm connected to this group in the gorge and part of this larger community. And same thing, it was, in order to be more welcomed into this tribe, into this greater community, like I had to earn my position there by riding better. And, I got stronger by hanging on the monkey bars, and I would go underwater and lay with my face in the water. So when I fell and got pinned under my sail in the waves, I didn't panic, and like all these things. And to me, it just became the catalyst with which all other great things that happened in my life stem from. And it sounds like you had the same experience, just without the community. You pushed yourself because you wanted to be better at windsurfing.
Well, I completely concur with that. I had a subscription to Windsurf magazine when I was in high school, and so I knew about Maui. I knew about Hood River. Is like Hood River was mentioned in every episode or every issue. And so I'm like, I knew I was going to visit these places one day. I knew they were, my tribe or whatever. But I went to college, and then after college, I went to Colorado. I wanted to be there to be a ski bum for 1 year after college, and I ended up spending 5 years there. And I got my EMT, and I became a ski patroller. And some guys I used to ski patrol with used to go up to Hood River and go windsurfing. They're like, you got to come up, and so I knew I wanted to do that. So when I first went to Hood River, even though I knew how to windsurf, I didn't tell anybody I knew how to windsurf, because that's like, I was very humble and very, I knew like this is the pinnacle of windsurfing, and these guys are all these pros and stuff. I was just in such awe. And so yeah, I remember dating this gal early on, and I told her I had no experience with windsurfing or whatever, and she's an amazing windsurfer, and like she intimidated me. And then she soon, after like a couple weeks of hanging out, she's like, "Wait a minute, you know how to windsurf?"
Trying to be a windsurf shark.
Yeah, I was like, "Well, I've done it, but I'm not. I had done it on a longboard. I had to learn how to shortboard. I had to learn how to water start." you know.
You didn't
And
know how
so
to
that
water
I
start.
didn't know how to water start because
Wow.
I was just uphauling my big, you know, windsurfer back in Lake Michigan, you know. And so, yeah, so those are, you know, and then you know, and then you start to see the people that operate at a really high level, you know. It's just like, you know, so yeah, it definitely pushes you.
Were you drawn to that level of that high of a level of experience like early on? Being
Yeah,
surrounded by it,
well,
like did it
I think here's where the intersection comes in. I think, you know, I feel like I'm jack of all trades, master of none. So I feel like, you know, everyone says, "Oh man, you're such a great athlete," you know, like you do all these different sports or whatever, but I only do them to a certain extent, a certain level. You know, I have a certain there's a certain place where I don't have the coordination, I don't have um the balance or the ability to do it at the highest level. And I kind of know, I've as I got older, I kind of realized where my limitations were, you know, like how far I could push it. But that's where I really wanted to pick up photography and start to follow people that operate at a really high level and get into their head, figure out, you know, like how they saw things and how they experienced, you know, what they're trying to achieve, you know. And so that way I kind of extend my own, you know, sort of sense of, you know, like where maybe I could have gone
Yeah.
or maybe not could have gone, but at least I'm there capturing what that essence is.
Yeah. Was there a defining moment that sort of thrust you into that role, or was it sort of a
I
experimentation?
I think part of it was just being like being at the hatchery. I, you know, I'm not reinventing the wheel. There was a photographer who would get in like an inner tube or a little boat, and he would get out on the Columbia River, and he had a little sail that would keep the current going one way, and the wind would keep him kind of maybe keep him in one place, you know. And so he would be out there shooting, and he was a lot older. I never actually saw him on the water, but I heard stories about him. And so I just kind of did the same thing. I got fins and I got an inner tube, and I jumped out in the Columbia River on days when they're like, you know, head high waves and it's blowing 30, 40 miles an hour. And these guys are jumping, you know, and to back up a second, I had this vision because I was out there on these days and I saw what was happening, and I had never seen pictures that, you know, of the things I was looking at.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I want to be in the water right here, and you know, what I'm seeing right now, I want to be able to capture that.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did, you know, and that was one of the earliest things for me where I was just so amped to share and convey like what was actually happening on the water for so few people out there can actually see,
Yeah.
you know. And then that extends to like big wave surfing, it extends to big mountain stuff in Alaska. It's like, you know, you're in places where there's only a handful of people ever get to witness, ever get to see, you know, and that's something I would love to share.
Yeah. So it's like you saw this this setting or an exposure that is so reserved for just a select group of people, and you wanted to share that with the world, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
so did you have experience with photography prior to that? Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We had a darkroom in our house growing up. My dad was, you know, avid photographer himself.
Okay.
Just hobbyist, but so my brother was never really into it, and so my dad made it really accessible to me, and so yeah, I always had a camera in my hands.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You were working as a nurse at the time, weren't you, in Hood River?
yeah, yeah. I after the ski patrol and the EMT stuff I did, I moved to Hood River. I went back to nursing school because I was really interested in medicine, and did that for about 7 years, and then. But
Trauma
then,
nurse?
yeah, I worked in emergency medicine. Yeah. And, but in, in that time, you know, I was working 12-hour shifts. I had 4 to 5 days off a week, and I started traveling and started doing more photography. And then there was a photographer who had broken his leg and couldn't make it to, New Zealand on a 10-day feature story on snow kiting for Kiteboarding Magazine. And
Yeah.
so they invited me to go. And I think it was on that trip in 2004 that I said, wow, this is something I really want to do.
Be a traveling action sport photographer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Was it just opportunity galore after you made that conscious decision, or was there some dues that had to be paid?
I always said that the day that my nursing license expires is the day that nobody buys a photo from me. But no, it definitely, progressed, and I became a senior photographer for Kiteboarding Magazine, traveled around the world. I got on the Big Wave World Tour. I was shooting big wave surfing down in Chile, Peru, Mavericks, Jaws, and especially on the Oregon coast at Lincoln City and Nelscott Reef.
Prior to that, had you had much experience in big waves? Like, you yourself are not an avid big wave surfer.
No.
When you first started going out into those environments, what was it like for you?
It was absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Now, I with Lincoln City and Nelscott Reef. Nelscott Reef is a reef break that's about 3/4 of a mile offshore. And the first year, the very first contest in 2005, I shot it from the shore, from the bluff, with a long lens, but it was so far away, you couldn't do it justice.
Yeah.
And
it
so
didn't capture that
knew,
vision in your heart that you wanted people to see.
Yeah. And so I knew in that off season, they committed to hiring me as their photographer. And so I got a water housing, and it was my goal to get out there. But the only way to get out there is through the shore break. So you are immediately on the ski, and you're immediately, fighting whitewater, and, some of it triple overhead in the shore break. And so, it was very, very daunting.
Yeah.
And you really have to trust your ski driver. And there's some ski drivers that ended up dumping me, and you're swimming, and, it can be pretty hairball.
Did you find in those moments that maybe you also needed to not only trust your ski driver, but like yourself and your own abilities?
Yeah. And I think that's where it's really important to, maintain your health and your physical fitness. It's because it's situations like that where, if you're not in shape, you're going to get gassed so quick. And that could lead to potential drowning.
Well, yeah. And those type of extreme environments, the consequences are definitely a little bit more intense than just a little bit of fatigue or being gassed. And
sure.
I know that you and I have both shared stories over the years where our preparation and physical fitness has led to our survival through, a particularly harrowing situation. Me, I have countless experiences in combat and extreme sports where, had I not done the preparation prior, definitely would not have made it through. And I'm sure you have plenty of experiences that very much mirror that in chasing people around the world in these extreme settings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What's the most intense situation you think that you found yourself in early on? I know you raise your eyebrows. I know that's a very, it's like, what do you love most about me, when your wife asks you that one? But like, what, if you had to pick, a story or a handful of stories that are like, this was the pinnacle of extremeness in my career, what would they be? Or what would the one be?
I think there's a couple that stand out. One of them is when I was up in Cordova, Alaska, shooting Seth Westcott, who's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. There were a couple of instances where they let me out on a little precipice, and then they flew away, and there was no way off of that. I wouldn't be able to climb down it. I wouldn't be able to, and I was just shooting, sort of long distance, and they had to come back and pick me up. And then some of those things that I had to ski. So after that, they took me up to a thing that was probably almost 50 degrees that I had to ski.
A 50-degree angle.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I had, and they put me in what was already a ripped out avalanche path. And so the snow was really, it wasn't, crappy.
Yeah.
And so I had one leg down, one leg, all the way up, and I'm trying to balance, without getting vertigo, to shoot Seth coming down this thing. And so some of those things, they put you in a space that nothing, there's no past, there's no future, there's no nothing. You are 110% in the present moment.
Yeah.
And, and that happened to out at Jaws. I was out there in 2010. It was the first time I was in the water out there, and it was this glassy day. There's like 40 to 50 foot faces. And I've got 100 frames of One Wave Ride by Shane Dorian, which ended up being the Ride of the Year award. And, and it gives me goosebumps, just to, remember to be, again, out there where it's like, wow, am I on Mars? Like this is such a crazy, these are crazy environments, and to be able to be in them and to be able to capture other people doing extreme stuff in them is just magical.
Wow.
Yeah.
That gives me goosebumps. Something that I was really interested in very early on with having my own experiences like that, where I have this sense of timelessness or like, leaving my body. I don't know where I begin and the surfboard ends, these types of experiences that are so prevalent in extreme sports. I really it was this like light bulb moment. There's a book. It's called The Rise of Superman. It's by an author called Stephen Kotler. Stephen is the founder of the Flow Research Collective. It's this organization that I studied with and was a part of for a number of years, where they do a lot of research on the optimal psychology state known as flow state. We talk about flow as, we're in flow, we're on a wave, and it's kind of a loose term that has been adopted and utilized somewhat correctly for a number of disciplines, but the actual like science surrounding flow is really rooted in a lot of set and setting. So we have these things called flow triggers, which at present there's like 22 of them, and it's things like a sense of autonomy, a sense of risk or danger, immediate feedback, clear goals. Like there's things that are really definable as these triggers, and the more of them you have, the more your conditions are fertile to enter flow. And flow is one of the most like rewarding, satisfying experiences that people can have. This Hungarian psychologist who is kind of known as the godfather of flow, his name's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He did a study in the 80s and 90s where it was like thousands of people, and they all described these experiences where they had flow in their lives. And it was like, well, that was the most magical experience in my life. And it's like, okay, well, the more research that goes into this and the more that they discover that people are actively seeking this, they're like, well, yeah, this is a phenomenal state and people chase it. So a lot of us who are, have been coined over the years like adrenaline junkies. It's like we're actually not after adrenaline. Adrenaline feels terrible. Like if you're driving your car and you almost get in a car accident, but you narrowly miss it and you get that like surge, that doesn't feel good. No. I'm not like chasing that sensation.
Absolutely.
But what we are chasing we're chasing flow. We're chasing this timeless, this state of pure presence and focus that requires a little bit of effort to get into, right? We don't want it to be handed to us. We want to work for it.
Sure.
And that's what makes experiences like extreme sports so magical, and why they've been such a massive part of my life and your life and everybody who we interact with on this show. But where I was going with that is these triggers that are so present. Like you can look back on all these experiences that you've had with, like when you're in the mountain in Canada, like you had an incredible amount of risk. You had immediate feedback because if you moved one way or the other, it was a matter of life and death. You had a clear objective, you're to capture these photos. You had immediate feedback. You had like, whoa, I just saw the picture that I took. And you had this sense of purpose where you're there doing something that is really piquing your passion. And the more of those you have, the more rich the experience is. And you hear it in improvising jazz musicians and surgeons and these people who are operating at sort of the higher echelon of risk. And I think that is the experience that more people are after. And that's why in my personal business, my coaching business at Session X, it's like, it's such a extreme sports are like the foundation, the bedrock. Whether or not you're an extreme athlete or not,
Right.
your desire to learn from these experiences, or at least draw inspiration from them. You know, we were speaking earlier about like wing foiling and the sport that's accessible to so many people. What is consequential and risky for somebody like Kai Lenny can be replicated for somebody who's, you know, maybe a 55-year-old nurse anesthetist from San Francisco in a much more contained and an approachable way. But at the end, the sensation is the same.
Yeah.
And that's what we're after.
Exactly.
Tell me a little bit about how you became such a force in the professional athlete space. How did you start to penetrate not just the big wave world tour, but now you're in big mountain, big sky sports? Your scope, it covers literally every extreme sport that I can think of. You have been there in the thick of it, capturing the most iconic and breathtaking shots. How did you get so diverse?
I think a lot of it's luck. No, I think, I consider myself a jack of all trades, master of none. So, and I maybe mentioned that again before, but, being into mountain biking, being into skiing, being into snowboarding, being into skateboarding, being into, again, I'm not good at any one of those things. I'm probably, skiing is probably my best discipline. Kiting is probably my, second best discipline. But I just love all kinds of sports and extreme sports. And so even, in all of the sports that I do, I'm obviously interested in those people that do those at a really high level in those disciplines. And meeting other athletes that are even outside that realm, like Super Frenchie, who's a ski mountaineer, ski base jumper, and being able to get out there and photograph him and work with him. And part of that is because I'm a ski mountaineer and I'm into climbing. And so, even though I didn't know anything about ski base jumping or whatever, when I met him because he's a ski mountaineer as well. And so we did some ski mountaineering together. And then there's a space off the south side of Mount Hood where he's done some ski base jumps. And so he's invited me a couple times to photograph him. And so, I like I said, I feel like it's luck. I feel like, I meet these athletes, because I'm entrenched in, in the discipline itself, or I'm really enamored with the discipline.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Was there at a certain point when you left nursing and devoted to becoming an entrepreneur, a small business owner, and your livelihood dependent on these capturing of these photos, did it take on a little bit more gravity at that point of like, well, I need to be able to show up, and if we're going to go up into these, these alpine conditions or into this big wave environment or these remote ends of the earth, like you can never be a liability for the athlete who you're supporting. Did those thoughts ever enter your consciousness? And if so, what did you do about it?
Absolutely. I mean, when I made that decision to kind of quit nursing and do this full time and do it in a real way, I needed to buckle down. I mean, I needed to, watch my diet, and I needed to exercise. I needed to train because, as my mom would say, well, that's a great photo you got, but where were you when you took that photo? And it's because I am above the person on the mountain, or I am underneath the water, in big waves or something. And so, it's a hard, you have to almost consider it as a discipline as a professional athlete.
Absolutely.
So I think that the photographers and videographers out there that train really, really hard, and, they can hold their breath, for, minutes on end, and, and they can get to altitude, they're the ones that are going to have the advantage. know? And so, and I don't want to say, I can't say that I've been 100% in that realm, because it's difficult to maintain, some of these athletes, most of these athletes are sponsored, and they're paid to do this, and my pay comes through the photographs that I create. And so it's a little bit different. I don't necessarily have somebody telling me that, I need to be doing this to maintain my sponsorship.
Yeah.
Because my sponsorship is really how well I perform.
Yeah.
So I think that it gets hard sometimes to self-motivate, because that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's like, how bad do you want it?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you get good paydays, and then, you're almost ready to rest on your laurels and say, oh, well, that was great. I got this 2-page thing in Men's Journal and for Canon cameras, and, and now I can just relax, and, but you can't.
Does that catch up to you?
It does. It catches up to you.
Yeah. So when we talk about motivation, there's two types. There's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation is, the expectations that are placed on us from an external source.
Yeah.
Oftentimes sponsors, or, what we perceive others think of us. But it's the intrinsic motivation that allows people to be so successful, allows somebody like you to have a long career and to operate at a ridiculously high level across a massive scope of sports and conditions and different athletes. What would you say your intrinsic motivation ultimately is? Is it the art? Is it like sharing the beauty?
I think
what is it?
I think it's sharing the beauty. I mean, for me, I see places and I see things, and I just want other people to experience that stuff.
Yeah.
And for me to be on a mountaintop on, a sunrise like in Kilimanjaro, I've got this photo at sunrise there where it's the most immaculate sunrise you've ever seen. Like, that's something I'm just like, I really, really want to share, and I've always said that, if photography became a job, if it became something that was, a chore or whatever, then, I'd quit, because I feel like when I go out on a photo shoot that I come back and I download the photos, and I feel like every one of those instances is like Christmas, and I am opening my presents, underneath the tree. It really is. Like, almost every time I go up to the mountain in the wintertime and shoot at meadows, powder days or whatever, I cannot wait. I drive home. I cannot wait to get home and download the photos. And so that, to me, those are gifts that, are gifts to me. And then, to share that and to have people come up to me almost daily and saying, wow, saw that photo, blah, 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 that was amazing, and thanks, or I have a couple that's like, your Instagram is the last thing I look at before we go to bed, and I'm like, okay, thanks. So
how do you see the world as such a beautiful place? Where does that come from?
I when I was a kid, I remember just laying on my belly with my hands up and looking
Writing
at
in your
the
diary.
TV. No, looking at the TV and looking at National Geographic, and looking at those programs and just being like, that's me. Like, even when I was like 5, 6 years old, I'm like, I want to be a National Geographic photographer. I want to be a videographer. I want to shoot lions. I want to do all this stuff, man.
What was it? Like, what was the appeal to it?
I don't know. It's just like, like we come into this world and we're so malleable, and for whatever reason, like, I have a very visual sense. Like, I look at, I feel like I look at the world in almost a 4-dimensional sense. So I see things 3-dimensionally. So I can see light and I can see subject, and I can see where I'm standing now is not where I want to be. I need to be standing like completely on the other side of this to get the light, the angle, whatever of what I'm looking for. And it's almost the 4th dimension of sort of putting together those three dimensions. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it's something that I don't know if you can cultivate. It might be something that you're just kind of born with.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's funny because we both live in Hood River, and often I drive past your house a lot when I'm going places, and I think it's on the side of your van. It has like your little placard, and the tagline, "Images that stir the soul," and that I could not think of a better way to capture what it is that you see than images that stir the soul. Like, I have looked at photographs of yours. I'm not necessarily into alpinism, but when I see photos that you've taken where there's just these jagged lines of just ice and mountain, and you capture somebody who has just found that moment of perfect harmony in that ridiculously extreme environment, it stirs my soul, man. It stirs something deep within me. And I draw so much inspiration from your photos. And like, as you know, and we all have, I've seen a lot of darkness in the world. You know, I have a lot of combat deployments. I've seen a lot of unnecessary suffering. I've seen a lot of tragedy. And when I see your gift to the world, the way that you see a millisecond, a frozen moment in time, it does something, man. It does something inside of me.
Thanks.
And well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, because I mean, you described it perfectly. I mean, you know, that's what I want to convey. That's what I want to leave. You know, when I'm long gone or whatever, you know, I want my artwork to inspire people. And, you know, I want it to be uplifting. I want it to be, there's enough tragedy. There's enough drama going on in the world. And, you know, it may not make me a rich man, but, you know, if I have a tale or two for my niece, you know, in the end, you know, then that's all worth it.
Well, that brings up a point I want to discuss with you is this line of work definitely has a shelf life to it. Like pushing the limits, like you have, going in some of these places that you've been and capturing the photos, like your mom said, like, where were you during that photo? Like that's finite. Like there's going to come a time when that will not be accessible to you.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
It's really tough. It's actually already happening. I mean, I'm 58 right now, and I feel like I'm, you know, fairly healthy for my age, but I'm definitely slowing down. In 2012, I climbed Mount Hood 17 times in about a 4-month period. And now, if I'm lucky, if I get up once a year, you know, it's just harder and harder to kind of maintain that physical, you know, you're battling knees and ankles and, you know, and, you know, you're doing more PT, you're doing more massage, you're doing all those things to try to keep pace. But yeah, that's a difficult turn to come to, because I feel like for the last 25 years or so, I've defined my life on being out there in the most extreme places. And that's what gives me the most, you know, it gives me the greatest satisfaction.
Yeah.
And so, it's definitely, you know, something that's been on my mind.
Yeah, for sure. I know you and I have spoken some different concepts for like the whole idea of like peak performance aging, you know, different ways of consumption, prioritizing sleep, joint mobility, training different in your 50s and maybe you did in your 20s and 30s and 40s, and allowing you to have more time in those spaces that bring you the most sense of purpose. And that's ultimately what we're all seeking. You know, we all want to actualize our purpose. For you, it's capturing the beauty of the most extreme moments and making it accessible for anybody to stir their soul. So I'm happy to be along your journey and to be supporting this. When you are in these moments where So we spoke a little bit earlier about flow state. It does also operate in what is even more powerful is this concept called group flow. Group flow is what you see when you watch like a perfect, what is it, the '94 Chicago Bulls. I watched
Yeah.
that thing with Michael Jordan.
Right.
Like when they're speaking this unspoken common language and they all have the same goal and they're all working towards the same thing. Group flow is incredibly prevalent in industry and development, and it's one of the most potent applications or experiences of flow. When you are working with an athlete and you are feeding off of each other and they're pushing you and you're pushing them, what is that relationship like, and who do you think has more influence on the outcome, you or the athlete? I know it varies, but
Yeah.
I want to hear your answer for it.
That's a great question. So, the greater the flow, the less the communication.
Oh, I'll always.
I mean,
Always.
there's no, you are in connect. You are in, you are in step. You are in. If I say something to Kyle Lenny, I'm out in the water with a water housing and he's kiteboarding or whatever, and I say, "Oh, there's a rainbow over there," then he knows that I want him to go upwind of me and do a back roll over the rainbow. I mean, I don't have to say anything. I mean, and ski mountaineers and, some skiing situations where all I have to do is, point my fingers or whatever. And yeah, so yeah, there's definitely athletes that, those athletes that are at the top of their game, like, Kai, you don't need to say anything at all. And they are so on point. You could draw a point in the sky and tell them to hit that point and they'll hit that point.
There's a little gecko bark. There is when I've been around a lot of really experienced helicopter pilots, and the really, really good ones are the ones who are like, I don't fly the helicopter. The helicopter is just an extension of me. Like I move my body and the helicopter just, we're in harmony together.
Yeah.
Orchestra conductors, they're not telling people what to do. They are conducting, they're bringing it to life. Do you have a similar experience? You're using the athlete in that moment to bring your creative vision to life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I remember one instance with Jesse Richmond, amazing kiteboarder, in Hood River, where we were shooting and we were heading towards sunset, and he was already saying, I'm done. This has been a great session. And I said, look, hang on just for another 20 minutes. The sunset's going to be absolutely mind blowing. And, so he hemmed and hawed. And so then he kept kiting. I said, well, just put your kite down, and just relax for a minute, and then we'll do it. And he said, no, if I put my kite down, I'm done. And so I said, okay, well, but he listened to me and he went with me. And then it was about 20 minutes, half an hour later, the sky was all red and orange and so crazy. And so he was hitting the kicker, and we got this insane shot that ended up being on the cover of Kiteboarding magazine. And then there's a 2-page spread inside that was really amazing. And he just, he was so, to watch his face and how elated he was that he's like, oh my God, I can't believe you saw that was going to happen. And I said, yeah, well, that's I do what I do. So, but yeah, those are amazing outcomes.
Yeah. Wow. That shot too is incredible. Has it ever backfired on you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Give me an example.
Anytime I tell an athlete, one more shot, one more time, because sometimes the vision just, the reality is, they are, spent because they've been riding all day or whatever. And so, yeah, you have to, there's so much give and take there. You can only do so much creatively, and you don't want to injure your athletes, and so it's hard because you know what they're capable of, and you know what the light is, and you really want something, and so you know, you're almost not stressed to, but you're trying to make something happen that, you know, that's, you know, it should just wait for another day,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's important when you can realize that. And, you know, because the worst thing that could happen is you're pushing an athlete, and the athlete wants to be pushed anyway sometimes. And if they were to get injured, you know, that's the worst.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Is there any other activity or hobby or pursuit that you do that gives you a similar sense of purpose and satisfaction that action sport photography does?
I mean, just being out there doing the sports that I shoot. I mean, just being out there kiteboarding, being out there mountain biking, you know, I like to, you know, uh, I mean, I push myself in my own ways, you know, and you know, I'm not anywhere near extreme anymore. I don't drop cliffs on skis much anymore. And I certainly don't, the rubber doesn't leave the dirt on my mountain bike much anymore, but, you know, but I still get a high of going down a single track, you know, at Mach Starward speed, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, I push to get that adrenaline. Sometimes I push to get that feeling, but it's not like I'm an adrenaline junkie. It's just that I like being in the moment,
Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the billion-dollar mindfulness industry, it's all, you know, that's the secret to anxiety, to a life of happiness is being present and being in the moment. So we have meditation apps and gurus, and everybody's trying to teach us the latest rage on how to be present and how to achieve perfect lotus position Instagram posture. And
Yeah.
that has been something that I have sought, where with combat, you're exposed to the purest sense of now. There's nothing like survivability to thrust you into the immediate moment. And that was a lot of the early work with Beneath the Surface Foundation that we did with a lot of these special operations veterans, was replacing the need for that immediate upregulating trigger, which we all experienced in combat. And tragically, there was a lot of gravitation to like drugs and alcohol for these men and women when they got out of that environment. And that's why we tried to replace those destructive habits with something that was a little bit more sustainable, like kiteboarding and surfing. And then same with down regulation, you know, where we would resort to alcohol and benzodiazepines and, you know, destructive behaviors, trying to replace that with something a little bit more therapeutic, like mindful movement, breath work, all these really powerful, sustainable practices that neurochemically and biologically elicit the same responses, that upregulating sensation of combat. If you are tethered to, you know, a 9-meter kite and 25 knot winds, there's the sense of similarity between that and a firefight. And I will argue anybody who says otherwise. That's something that I am very, very passionate about. Have you experienced or seen or have personal knowledge or personal exposure to some of the darker sides of extreme sports?
Oh, absolutely. You know, just like you talked about with up regulating, down regulating. Yeah, well, the first time I summited Mount Hood was in the mid to late 90s. And when I got done summiting Hood, I had such a rush of adrenaline, such a high of dopamine, serotonin, you know, you name it, norepinephrine.
That's right.
You know, all that. I mean, it was, and it lasted with me for like a week at least. I mean, that high, you know, and I don't know, it's a lot like some of the things that we chase. You know, I don't feel like I'm an adrenaline junkie. I chase that one experience of being present, you know, but over the years I've summited Hood 61 times. And so that's one of the places where I always want to go back to replenish that sort of feeling. And And so I get, I've done it 61 times, but the 61st time, which was just, last year, those feelings that those endorphins, that serotonin, all that, it's such a law of diminishing returns. It's like over time, no matter how hard you do the same thing that you did the first time, that return on that investment is just not there. Like those endorphins, all that stuff feel like they've subsided by the time I've driven home.
Oh man.
It's like I'm just 2 hours removed from summiting, and it's like, all right, I'm already back to normal. And so, unfortunately, the darker side of some of this is that you want to try and maintain this sort of feeling, this euphoria, this whatever. And I think that, that's where alcohol and drugs can come in.
Yeah.
And it can come in a way that's not, definitely not healthy. It's not about like, I'm not about, there are times when I'm not there to get drunk or anything, or that's not my thought process. My thought process is like, I want to get back to where I was in the way I felt on the summit of Mount Hood. And so that can be, over time, that can be something that, it's such a fooler, because you never ever get there with drugs or alcohol. You never achieve that sort of, level of, that there's not an uptick there.
Yeah.
There's not, but you can't think of a different way in the moment to try to extend that feeling. And so you do it sometimes with alcohol. Sometimes I did it with pain meds.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's definitely, it's definitely been a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Over the years.
Thank you for sharing that. I know it's a hard conversation for anyone to discuss. I think my personal experience as it relates to alcohol wasn't to replace those sensations that I was craving. I think it was more to numb the fact that I was not experiencing those sensations.
Right.
It was like, well, if I can't, I understand what you're saying though. You crave the nowness, like the absolute purity, the single focus, the quiet mind, and alcohol is an easy way to do that.
Well, it can be, because in a moment of complete sobriety, and if I try to sit here and meditate, my mind is going every which way. And meditation isn't always about clearing your mind,
For sure.
but in the sense that you are trying to clear your mind and you're trying to have that sense, alcohol does start to reduce those external thoughts and all that stuff. And so you do sort of, you artificially get there, but you get there in a way that now you're not conscious of what your true happiness in that moment.
Yeah.
It's just not there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's this veil, this illusion of presence.
Yeah.
And it's definitely been, as a performance coach and just as a human in general, when I work with people, one of the most common goals for people that I work with is to either become completely abstinent from alcohol or other types of intoxicants, or to like drastically limit their amount of consumption, because they identify that it's like, hey, this actually does not serve me in any way possible.
Right.
I think I was working with a few athletes last summer, and there was this mindset surrounding, well, when I have a really rad session, I like to, sit at the picnic table at the event site and crack open a few beers. That's kind of like the closure of the session. It's like, what? Like, you were just out, it's classic gorge day. It's 30 knots. The river swells overhead. You just were out there for 3 hours, and you're gonna close it out with a couple beers. It's like, so a lot of that is like reframing mindset, and like actually allowing time to allow your conscious, your brain to absorb those experiences, and for your brain to reward you. And it's like, I for one guy in particular, it's like, hey, if you're not getting what you need, from the session, change the circumstances of the session, take your wetsuit off, up the risk, up the novelty of it, you know? And it's like little injections like that sometimes make all the difference for folks. And, you know, but it's like you need that external lens to see that. So for sure, man. Thank you for sharing your experiences with that.
Yeah.
Which brings me to another question I think, you know, we can probably close on is we talk about novelty as being a massive flow trigger. You know, this concept of, well, this is new, this is novel. I have to learn this environment, learn this experience, learn this sport. Do you think that part of your creative journey has been seeking out novelty in new ways to explore your art form?
Wow. Well,
like you went from big waves to big mountain. You have paragliding, sky sports, base jumping, free skiing, alpinism, free diving, like conventional surfing, snowboarding, skiing, like all of these things. And it's like, was novelty at the heart of that? Well,
you know, shooting all the different sports. And there's sometimes when I feel like this is why I love seasons. You know, I love winter. I love being in the middle of the winter stuff and all the skiing stuff and ski mountaineering stuff. And then as soon as spring comes, there's mountain biking. And then there's, you know, and then you get into the summer, you get into kiting, windsurfing, you know, out the coast surfing. So novelty for me, you know, it's really rare to have true novelty anymore because I've kind of done about every sport there is possible to shoot, but the novelty is in the seasons. And, you know, just about when I'm ready to, you know, get comfortable with a season, it's changing.
Yeah.
And now it's into something else and whatever. And so I'm able to put that on the shelf and move on to, you know, something different, you know, in that particular season. And so as far as novelty goes, that, you know, that's probably the best way I could describe that.
That was a beautiful answer, which brings me to my next question that I had to load up. Do you see, of course you see, the just overwhelming immediacy of extremeness that exists on like social media? For example, like you can't just scroll social media without seeing the next most insane thing you've ever seen.
Yes, absolutely.
When we mentioned earlier about chasing that sensation, like chasing those moments of glory.
Yeah.
Do you think that people are becoming desensitized?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I just posted a photo of Greg Long at Jaws the other day, and I would say a few years ago, if I posted that same photo, I would get a few hundred likes. It's gotten 23 likes, you know, and I posted that like a week ago.
Yeah.
And so, and I know for myself, it's an inflection point of, you know, I am there posting stuff, and when I get on social media, you know, in the morning or whatever, and I start scrolling through, I know that I have seen some of the most insane photos that I've seen in my entire life in those first 5 minutes of just me scrolling.
Yeah.
And so for me to sit there and go, okay, well, how do I, you know,
how
do I elbow my way to the top and say, no, look at me.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, it's, you know, it's tough.
Yeah. So. And that, I mean, the pressure that's on athletes as well, you know,
right.
Like remember the Millennium Wave, Laird's Chopu Millennium Wave. Remember like absolutely. How one picture circulated the globe with absolute fire, you know, Laird at Chopu, just that was all anybody talked about for 6 months.
Yeah. They thought the physics of it were
impossible. Yeah. And everybody had interviews, and it was the photo that just, I see on any given morning sitting on Instagram for 5 minutes, I see 20 versions of that. And it's like, they're not even getting the recognition or notice. Like where is the limit for both the athletes, for the people capturing it, for the people who are aspiring to be in this? And this is a rhetorical question. I don't expect an answer. And that's something that keeps me awake at night, is I as I work with a lot of these extreme athletes, and they have this now extrinsic motivation. Maybe before, this athlete didn't want to ride Chopu on a hydrofoil and try and get, deep into that school bus sized barrel, but now they feel compelled to, and like that's becomes part of what they need to do. And there's just this chasing of I don't even know the word for it. You're chasing something that is just so mind blowing constantly.
Yeah. Well, I think that we reached the limit of, what the human body is capable of. Where, through evolution, our bodies can only protect us as fast as we can run. So anytime that we're going faster than that, we're putting our brains at risk, we wear protective equipment. We wear helmets, we wear, body pads. Football players, wear shoulder pads and helmets. But again, we're pushing the limits of what is humanly possible. And, there comes a point where,
the limits push back.
Yeah. And, the surfers are going for the 100-foot wave, and the mountain bikers are going for the triple backflip jump over Moab, and the wingsuiters are, trying to land without a parachute, and, so on and on and on, So yeah,
I both am fascinated and I love it. That's what inspires me. That's the whole thesis of what I do. I believe that action sports and extreme sports are what allows ultimate human potential to be discovered.
Yeah.
And it's an exciting time. It's a terrifying time. It's an exciting time. It's all the emotions. But I feel that nothing brings me as much presence as working with an athlete who has an idea for a project. And it's like, all right, man, well, how do we shore your physical body, your mental state, your mindset, your emotional state, your recovery, your sleep, your nutrition, like all these things need to be absolutely perfect for this one glimpse on Instagram that may just get brushed over.
Right.
And it's a weird kind of paradox that we have to come to. But as long as people like us continue to just be enamored by the beauty, and for me, the physical accomplishment and mindset surrounding it, I think we're in a good place.
Yeah. Awesome.
Richard, my brother, it was an absolute pleasure to chat with you as always. Thank you for taking the time to share your story and to share your vision of how you see the world, and for sharing so much beauty with all of us, man.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate it.
I want you to leave us with one last little bit of wisdom. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would you say?
I would say, first of all, never give up, and don't let any kind of peer pressure force you to make decisions that are not in line with what your goals are.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Richard Hallman, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Appreciate you.
Looking for the red light.
Got it.
I can teach you a thing or two about cameras, Richard.
Yeah.
You stick with me, you'll learn a little something.